Our famous Eiffel Tower. Iron is everywhere. But the most commonly used iron-based object is the knife. How has its manufacturing process evolved over the centuries? We'll investigate. Let's take a trip to the past, in the 15th century.
It cuts well, right?
Yes.
We're at Crèvecoeur-en-Auge Castle in Normandy. In Europe, we mastered ironwork more than 2,000 years ago. But it was at the end of the Middle Ages that metallurgy made some considerable progress. Vincent Le Couturier is a skilled blacksmith. He will reveal to our visitors the science behind making a knife.
So, do you know what job this is?
It's a blacksmith.
It's the blacksmith's job to make tools for everyone. Agricultural tools for farmers, for lumberjacks, carpenters, all that.
But where does the iron, from which he forges all these tools, come from?
For starters, we have iron ore. Iron ore is found in nature. It's a stone that can be collected quite easily.
Indeed, there are deposits of iron ore all over France. But to exploit it, you must first reduce it to a powder and melt it by heating it with charcoal. It's an essential step because that's where we'll transform it into steel, a very strong metal.
We obtain iron ore, and in this smelted iron ore there is coal, which has added very pure carbon. And that is what makes steel. Carbon makes the steel very hard. This is why, since the dawn of time, steel has been used to give this cutting-edge resistance.
Steel is an alloy of iron and a small amount of carbon. There's a maximum of 2% in it. Now Vincent will tackle shaping the blade of our knife.
So, do you know why I'm heating the metal?
So that the iron bends more easily.
That's it, exactly. So that it becomes soft, in fact. Because the metal, when you heat it, becomes soft. It's a bit like modeling clay, you see. When it's cold, look, it's all hard.
Indeed, at room temperature, the steel bar is solid.
It's very solid.
That's why the blacksmith's first secret is to bring it up to a red heat. He fires a charcoal fire with two huge bellows that work alternately. In this way, the oxygen supply is continuous. Our blacksmith then reaches the ideal temperature of 1,000 degrees. It's 4 times hotter than the maximum temperature of our domestic ovens.
And here, the metal is hot, and I can manipulate it, you see. It becomes very soft.
With a strong and precise movement, Vincent beats the iron while it's hot. Placed between the hammer and the anvil, the metal bar takes shape.
But how do you know what the right temperature is?
Well, thanks to the color. Look, you see the colors? They change. Here it's brighter, and here it's darker. And where it's brighter, it's warmer.
Yes, the hotter the steel, the more shocks there are between the atoms that make it up. These shocks give off energy in the form of light. A cherry red light indicates a temperature of 800 degrees. And a bright yellow light, even more energetic, indicates that the steel is at 1,000 degrees. Simply deciphering the colors of a metal was a real know-how of blacksmiths in the Middle Ages. The basic principles for forging metal have been the same for centuries, except that today, machines have changed everything. We're in Vire, Normandy, at a famous French tableware manufacturer. In this factory, more than 16,000 pieces are manufactured daily, including 3,000 knives. Here, the steel bar is heated to 600 degrees, much less than our blacksmith. But that's enough, because it's no longer a man's hand who strikes, but a gigantic robotic hammer with a pressure of 1,200 tons. In one blow, the handle is forged.
On the forging machine, we are going to heat the rod and hit what will be the handle with a big hammer. Then the material is stretched to the various desired sizes, and finally we have the last operation. We will remove the excess to get a practically finished product.
Today, the metal is flattened like a pastry to form the blade of the knife. It's much faster than in an old-fashioned forge, where it took a day to make a single knife by hammering. Thanks to this productivity gain, we have dozens of different knives at home. But that hasn't always been the case. Back to the Middle Ages. At that time, the knife was then an object of great value for its owner.
A knife is a personal object. When we were invited to someone's house, we brought our own knife, and we would keep this knife for a very long time. There are even knives that were passed down as an inheritance.
Therefore, the knives had to be very sturdy. For this, blacksmiths of the Middle Ages already practiced quenching. Once the blade is forged, it's heated to a very high temperature, and it's immediately immersed in cold water. This results in hardened steel.
So when quenching, we rapidly cool the material down, and the metal becomes very hard. The steel becomes very resistant.
Let's demonstrate. Here's a hardened steel chisel. It's so solid that it nicks the steel bar without even deforming. And look, with an unhardened steel chisel, it doesn't nick the bar. And its tip has been damaged. But what's the secret of quenching? In fact, it changes the structure of steel. Under the effect of the sudden cooling, the carbon atoms will align in a uniform fashion and will even fixate inside the iron crystals. It's this organization of the material that makes hardened steel so resistant. Today, quenching is still practiced. Back to the factory in Vire. In this machine, the knife is heated to 1050 degrees, then it cools very quickly. In the laboratory, you can measure the gain in strength on this machine.
After the quenching process, the hardness is doubled, giving us a cutting edge that is very durable over time.
But steel has an enemy, rust. Remember, steel is over 98% iron. Under the effect of humidity, iron combines with the oxygen in the air. In other words, it oxidizes. So, in the 1950s, the founder of this brand decided, for the first time in Europe, to use stainless steel in the manufacturing of cutlery. It's also known as inox. It's a steel in which 10% chromium is added, a metal that's slightly sensitive to corrosion. Look at this test. Raw steel and stainless steel are immersed in a corrosive bath, and 6 hours later,
here, after 6 hours corrosion test, it is clear that the steel was attacked by a layer of rust, while the stainless steel, thanks to the presence of chromium inside the material, is completely protected. In fact, chromium will develop a protective layer on the surface, which limits the oxidation inside.
You now know how to mass-produce high-performance knives. But what do they think of the knife that Vincent, our blacksmith, took a day to make?
It is a forged knife made of steel, which is very effective. It cuts extremely well. Just because it comes from the Middle Ages doesn't mean that it is backwards technology. In any case, the great cooks today use forged knives that have been forged the same way as in the Middle Ages.
If today we all have knives, it's thanks to the first blacksmiths of history. By discovering the extraordinary physical laws that make it possible to transform iron ore into steel, they've paved the way for us.